Welcome to the Deep Dive, the podcast that courageously swims into topics everyone else avoids, mostly because they value sleep. We've also been off the air for a bit, thanks to our producer FireflyHaku, who just moved continents again, but now that he's plugged back into the right voltage, we're back, fueled by caffeine, sarcasm, and maybe just a little bit of existential dread. Today we're breaking down an article by Kurt M. Campbell, and we're exploring the rising risk of an accidental US-China conflict. Yep. The kind of oops, wrong button moment no one wants, made way worse by Beijing's charming refusal to pick up the military hotline. Because who needs communication when you've got missiles, right?
All right, let's get right into it, because this isn't some abstract threat that's years away. The danger of this communication breakdown is very real, it's tangible, and it is happening right now in the skies and seas of the Western Pacific.
I want you to just picture this for a second. You're piloting a massive nuclear-capable B-52 bomber. It's a routine mission, you're over international waters. And then out of nowhere, a Chinese fighter jet screams past you. Not a few hundred feet away, but just 10 feet. 10. That is less than the length of a Toyota Corolla. This wasn't some scene from a movie. This happened in October 2023, a terrifyingly real incident that was inches away from a catastrophic collision.
And it's not just happening in the air. A few months before that, the U.S. destroyer Chang'un was sailing through the Taiwan Strait when a Chinese warship basically did the naval equivalent of cutting you off in rush hour traffic. It sped up, sliced right across the American ship's path, and forced the destroyer to slam on the brakes to avoid a collision. Now, the wildest part of all this is that last point. The Chinese ship completely ignored every single attempt to communicate. Just radio silence, during a maneuver that breaks like all the standard rules of the sea.
And that's really the heart of the issue, isn't it? These aren't just aggressive moves. They are massive gambles. U.S. analysts are, getting seriously worried that one of these close calls, one tiny miscalculation or an accident, could be the spark that lights the fuse on a direct military conflict between two nuclear powers.
So, to stop this exact kind of thing from happening, the United States turned to a strategy that had worked like a charm before, back during the Cold War. They basically dusted off the old playbook they'd successfully used with the Soviet Union and tried to apply it to their relationship with China.
And this slide just lays out the total disconnect. See, with the Soviets, the U.S. set up these really clear agreements, like the 1972 Incidents at Sea Pact. It created predictable rules of the road that worked. It reduced risk. But when they tried the exact same thing with China, aiming for reassurance, building confidence, it was met with just deep suspicion. The whole effort was ignored or just shut down. It totally failed. So what gives? Why the completely different reaction?
To really get why Beijing is so wary, we have to rewind the clock a bit and look at some key historical moments. These events have profoundly shaped how China's military, the People's Liberation Army, or PLA, thinks about talking directly with the United States. This timeline really shows a pattern of growing mistrust. It kicked off with some dangerously close encounters back in '94. Then, during the Taiwan Strait crisis in '95 and '96, the U.S. sent in aircraft carriers, a move that Beijing saw as a massive public humiliation. For a second there, in '98, it looked like things might get better when a military hotline was set up, but that hope, well, it didn't last very long.
So in 2001, a U.S. spy plane and a Chinese fighter jet actually collided mid-air. The American plane had to make an emergency landing on China's Hainan Island, and its 24 crew members were detained. I mean, this was the exact kind of crisis that hotline was built for. But when U.S. officials picked up the phone, nobody in Beijing answered. For the U.S., it proved the hotline was totally useless. And for China, it just reinforced their instinct to keep a tight lid on everything. So this whole history of mistrust brings us to the core strategic thinking behind China's radio silence. This isn't just about old grudges. It is a deliberate, calculated choice. Beijing actually prefers to be unclear, to be unpredictable.
Okay, so from Beijing's point of view, it kind of breaks down like this. First, they think transparency isn't a two-way street. They believe it only helps the U.S. military, which is already more powerful. Second, they're afraid that signing formal agreements would basically be like putting in writing that their military is inferior. And third, they see all this American talk about confidence building as a sneaky tactic to keep tabs on them and slow down their rise.
And this quote from the article really just hits the nail on the head. Beijing believes that by being a black box, by being unpredictable, they actually gain the upper hand. The thinking is, if the U.S. has no idea how China will react, American commanders are going to be a lot more nervous about operating anywhere near China's borders.
So on one side, you have the fundamental American military philosophy. Washington believes that clear rules, open phone lines, and predictable behavior are what create stability. Basically, you prevent war by talking things out.
And then you have Beijing's view, which is the complete polar opposite. They believe that uncertainty and a lack of transparency are what keep them safe. You prevent war by making your opponent guess what you'll do, and just hope they guess you're too dangerous to mess with. And here's a critical distinction that you have to understand. The People's Liberation Army, the PLA, isn't the army of the country of China. It is the armed wing of the Chinese Communist Party. And because the party is obsessed with maintaining control, any kind of independent communication channel for military commanders is seen as a direct threat to its authority, especially during a crisis.
All of this brings us right back to the danger we're in today. With these two totally opposed views on military communication, how in the world do we move forward and, not have a catastrophe?
This is the really chilling question the article leaves us with. I mean, it took the entire world coming to the absolute brink of nuclear war in 1962 for the US and the Soviet Union to finally install that famous red telephone. Do we really need to go through a similar near-death experience before Washington and Beijing get serious about talking to each other?
And that, right there, is the urgent final takeaway. Waiting for a disaster to force your hand is not a strategy. It's a gamble with stakes that are just unthinkable. The real challenge is to build these channels and somehow find a way past all this deep-seated mistrust before a crisis hits, before that urgent call is made and there's nobody on the other end to answer. So buckle up and subscribe. The Deep Dive is where world tensions meet humor, history meets chaos, and FireflyHaku keeps us from accidentally starting our own Cold War with the recording software.